Hello folks, this is the Archaeology of Archaeology online part 5. This is a look at Tintagel. As you have discovered from my previous Archaeology of Archaeology series, we're probably interested in what's changed and people's opinions of certain archaeological sites. Anyway, this is Karl-James Langford and we're going to be looking at Tintagel. Tintagel sits in the seat of myth, legend, reality, archaeology and history. So the opening images, we cannot be excused for using a sword, which you could say depicts the link between Tintagel and maybe legend, myth or facts behind the very King Arthur himself. What we do know about Tintagel is that there are remains of a castellated site, but seemingly imposing and stentorial, to some even today. But back in the 1800s there was a lot more of it to see. So let's look at this first image. This first image shows Merlin's cave, yes. King Arthur and Merlin. Merlin's cave is there sort of towards the right there, centre-wise. So when you think about Tintagel, the first researchers into Tintagel were armed with the myths and legends of a very depth of interest in a landscape, Cornwall, for those that don't know where Tintagel is. Cornwall jettisons itself out into the Atlantic Sea. People did believe that maybe at one point Tintagel was the seat of the very King Arthur himself. As we look at King Arthur fleetingly, King Arthur is seen and borne out in legend and myth. He's here, there and everywhere, a bit like the Scarlet Pimpernel. King Arthur can be seen to be in many locations: Camelon Colchester, Camelford, again Camelot. We can think of him in Wales, we can think of him in Cumbria. Many believe that he was in fact at Tintagel, but the real nuances at Tintagel are not to be seen in the later edifice constructed at Tintagel, but the very slight nuances that are to be found in the ground. These walls looking out onto mainland Cornwall from a rocky, almost island that Tintagel Castle is built upon. Looking back at the land, looking there at the very land route, that's all that connects mainland Britain with this rocky islet, which isn't environed on all sides by water, but there's just a little spit there. So the north centre bit is the remains of the properly defended site, the medieval defended site at Tintagel. But underneath that, archaeologists started to wonder. From the 1920s onwards, people started to wonder what could actually be there. Very recent excavations have revealed signs that this site was a great leap of cosmopolitan trade in the period of 500, which is in fact the period of King Arthur. But we're not really looking for King Arthur today. Nice little bit of a reconstructed drawing there, and these guys looking out at the island. Yes, it would have been like a little citadel there. That's the medieval citadel, nothing to do with King Arthur at all. What we're looking for is what can be said. Historians have said that Tintagel was in fact the seat of King Arthur, but there's no real evidence. It's in the archaeology we move to possibly find the evidence of the period in the AD 500s where things were very disconnected, disarticulated from the once Roman world that collapsed in Britain in 476 with the eventual overthrow of Rome by a Roman itself. This is showing two maps of the locations of Tintagel. And look at this little image here, showing other places that might actually be associated with King Arthur. But then again, you think of King Arthur, you think of Tintagel, you think of the whole landscape. Even back in Wales and the Gower, there's King Arthur's cave. You've got King Arthur's rock. You've got all these different places associated with King Arthur and King Arthur's woods and so on. But no, it's very similar in Cornwall. This is a reconstruction of that moment in the medieval period, but the medieval period many years after the legends of King Arthur. Looking at this rock itself, underneath these palisades, up behind it, archaeology has been excavating since the 1920s, finding little bits of evidence from that period of the early medieval, roughly the AD 500s, when the whole land was very much bereft in the archaeological record of much to say. But obviously there were still people here. They didn't all disappear when Rome collapsed. In this type of landscape here, you see some walls of possibly medieval buildings, but underneath these structures is the links of that cosmopolitan trade. This is not what Tintagel looked like, but you can think of those palisades imposing, but again, nothing to do with King Arthur. But this itself, showing a fleeting reconstruction of the medieval period, say about 1300s, the mainland bit there, the island itself of Tintagel, and those buildings are the fortified areas, but it's more or less been a bit of a showcase site. When you think about it though, looking onto the next plan, this is more interesting to us. So we've gone away from trying to find King Arthur, we've actually gone into the real nuances of this landscape, where we're actually starting to look all those little indications of buildings on there, sort of to the centre and east of this map, show buildings that date all the way back to the AD 500s, that period that we don't know a lot about. But great trade, pottery from the Mediterranean, glass from the likes of Syria, various other metal objects. Now, there's an inscription found associated with King Arthur not only about a decade ago at Tintagel. When you say associated, there's no proof it ever was, but then again, there's proof that there was lots of activity in the AD 500s. If King Arthur ever existed, he would never have been at Winchester with his round table. Illustration of King Arthur there. When you think about King Arthur again, you link this great history that was put together by Geoffrey of Monmouth in AD 1136, purporting the legends of King Arthur and linking, maybe for the first time, King Arthur with Tintagel, which is given a slightly different name at that point. This stone itself, a bit of a runic inscription on, found just over a decade ago. There you go. And that's believed, that inscription there, sort of highlighted, is believed to link with King Arthur, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe King Arthur never existed. Pottery itself from the height of the medieval period, but obviously pottery of this level of quality was found much earlier, in the AD 500s, imported in from the continent. What we can say about Tintagel is that when you look at the archaeology and the history, there's very early history there, going beyond before AD 500. Very interesting early medieval history. If you want to think it's to do with King Arthur, then fair enough, but any site that has early medieval archaeology, people associate with King Arthur. He was here, there and everywhere. And then again, people were carrying on with their everyday lives, and therefore, let's stop looking for King Arthur. Let's keep him in myth and legend, and let's look for the archaeology telling us of a landscape with or without King Arthur in the AD 500s. It's Karl-James Langford, briefly looking at Tintagel. Thanks today for listening and watching my slides.